Welcome to Unit 16. Your first root is ply or plick, which means to fold or copy. And your first word is compliance, which is the act of conforming, that should be or, yielding, obedience. I gave you two examples. The first one is he showed compliance by sitting down when asked to do so. So showing compliance there by sitting down is being obedient, conforming to the expectations. The second example there is she was usually very compliant and rarely got in trouble. So she's obedient, she follows the rules, therefore she doesn't get in trouble. The sample sentence that they gave you is the restaurant was fine because it was not in compliance with the state's health regulation laws. So it's not being obedient to the state laws. Your second ply or plick word is explicit, which means fully explained or revealed. And this word is used in two pretty different ways. The first one just means really clear. So that first example I gave you, explicit instructions are easy to follow. So the instructions are fully explained, fully revealed, therefore they can be followed easily. The second sense is, in the second example I gave you, the movie was rated R because of explicit violence. So explicit violence, it would be violence that is fully shown on the screen. So therefore, a movie might be rated R because that violence is not hinted at, it's just fully shown. The helpful hint here uses that definition right there. Music sometimes comes with a warning of explicit lyrics. The song doesn't hint at something sexual or violent or vulgar, but instead lays it out there for everyone to hear. And the sample sentence gives you that first use. Knowing that his son was incredibly poor with directions, Dwayne wrote out explicit driving instructions, including little maps and approximate mileages. So gave very clear, explicit instructions. Your second root is dia or die, which means through or across. And your first word is diagnosis, a determining of the cause of a problem most often used regarding medical problems. I gave you two examples. They saw 4 doctors before they got a diagnosis for the strange illness. So the first 3 doctors couldn't say what was wrong, and then finally the 4th doctor was able to give a diagnosis or say what was wrong. And the second example I gave you right here was the doctor diagnosed me with the flu. So the diagnosis was that I had the flu. He diagnosed me with the flu. He said that was what was wrong with me. You may remember that we had the word prognosis in an earlier unit. Prognosis was what's going to happen next, right? So since you have the flu, you will feel tired for 3 days and then get better. Whereas the diagnosis is exactly what's wrong with you. So the diagnosis is that you have a flu. The prognosis is that you'll get better in 4 days. Your sample sentence here is, the family was saddened by the doctor's grim diagnosis, but they knew they could get through the next few months together. So whatever that diagnosis was not good. Your second dia word is dialogue, which is conversation between 2 people. And I'll read you their sample sentence first. Some novels rely almost entirely on dialogue, while in others the characters rarely speak at all. So dialogue in a novel is anytime characters are having conversations with each other. I gave you 2 examples. The first one is you should try to have a dialogue with someone before judging them, so have a conversation before judging. And the second one is that plays are written as dialogue. So almost all of the words within the text of a play would be characters speaking to each other. Your next root is dox, which means belief. And your first word is heterodox, which means not in accordance with established beliefs or radical. So hetero means different, which is a root in the word heterosexual. You might recognize that. So if someone has different beliefs, it's not in accordance with established beliefs, or it's radical. This word is often used in terms of religion, so I gave you a couple religion examples here. The first one is many Christians hold heterodox beliefs about divorce, same-sex marriage, or attending church. So while the orthodox belief would be that divorce is wrong, many Christians in fact believe in divorce, so those beliefs would be heterodox. The second example is the heterodox group broke away from the church and formed a new religion. So if their beliefs really just didn't go along with their initial religion, a heterodox group might form a new religion, and that's actually how a lot of religions in history have been formed. Your second docs word is paradox. I think this one's kind of a fun one. It is a self-contradictory statement that cannot be satisfactorily explained. Often, though, even though it's a phrase that contradicts itself, there is some deeper meaning in it. So the example that I gave you here is the paradox, freedom is not free, emphasizes the need to work to preserve our liberties. So you look at that phrase, freedom is not free, and you say, what? The definition of freedom is being free. But then kind of that deeper meaning is that you need to work to preserve your liberties and your freedoms, or they'll be taken away. I'll give you the helpful hint, actually, and then the sample sentence. So the helpful hint down here, everything that I say is a lie is a famous paradox. If the statement is a lie, then the sentence is no longer accurate. If the statement is true, then the sentence is equally inaccurate, right? So if everything that I say is a lie, then that statement, everything that I say is a lie, isn't true. So therefore what I say is true, but then I've just lied because I've said that everything I say is a lie, right? So then you kind of end up in this circle where you can't figure out what it's saying. The sample sentence is, it wasn't just a paradox when Bill said, wherever I am never there. His friends had noticed how distracted he had become recently. And my last example, just for how to use it, he spoke in paradoxes that were difficult to understand, is just a way to use it without actually naming a paradox. Your next root is more or mort, which means death. And your first word is morbidity, which is an unhealthy mental state or unwholesome gloominess. And two examples. The boy sank into a state of morbidity after his friend's death. And then your second one, her morbid humor made everyone uncomfortable. So you see that I've used it in two different ways. The first one is a noun, right? So you can be in a state of morbidity, or you can be feeling morbid, or you could have morbid humor, or you could make morbid jokes. Would be like gloomy jokes, gloomy humor, talking about death a lot. It's important to note morbidity does not mean you're actually dying, right? Morbidity refers to the mental state or like the things that you are saying and that you're thinking about death a lot or talking about death a lot. The sample sentence down here, the kindergarten teacher was concerned at Claire's unusually morbid drawings, which usually included monsters and injuries. So if a child is drawing things that are death-like, that would be morbid drawings. Your second death word is moribund, which means in a dying state or near death. So whereas morbidity is about thoughts about death, moribund really means literally dying. Your first example up here, friends and family gathered around the moribund man. So if he was near death, friends and family gathered around him. Second, my plants were moribund after a week without water. So the plants are going to die because they haven't been watered. You'll notice it does not always have to do with people. And then the last one also doesn't have to do with people. The man declared bankruptcy when it became clear that his company was moribund. So the company is in a dying state near death. So he declared bankruptcy. And the sample sentence that you're given down here, after the battle, the army had to abandon the injured and moribund horses and departed only with the ones that were healthy enough to walk. Kind of sad. So your next root is omni, which means all, and your first word is omnipotent, having unlimited power. So the root potent here, potent means powerful. So omnipotent, all-powerful. This word really can only in a literal sense refer to God, because no one or nothing is actually literally omnipotent or all-powerful. So I give you that example here, God is omnipotent. But we do use it to talk about people who seem omnipotent, you would say, or think they are omnipotent, you would say. But you wouldn't really say that anyone else other than God is omnipotent. So for an example, my boss clearly wishes she were omnipotent. She demands that everything be done exactly her way, right? So someone can wish that they were omnipotent. The sample sentence is several online games allow the player to act as an omnipotent god, controlling the lives of an entire population. So there are video games that can make you an omnipotent god, right? But that's obviously not in a literal sense, it's just in the sense of the video game. Your second omni-root is omniscient, which means all-knowing. That shint root with the psi in there, it tells you down here we encountered psi. Psi means to know. People confuse omnipotent and omniscient all the time, so you want to make sure that you remember that potent has to do with power, omnipotent, all-powerful, and that psi has to do with knowledge, right? So omniscient, all-knowing. Similarly, no one is omniscient except for God. However, people can seem omniscient. You can think people are omniscient. You could play an omniscient character in a video game. You can have an omniscient narrator, which is a narrator in a novel who knows about everything that's happening. So I gave you a sentence up here. My mother seems omniscient. She always knows what I'm thinking. So again, she is not omniscient, but she seems omniscient because it seems as if she can read your mind. And the sample sentence down here, Lord of the Flies is written with an omniscient narrator who is able to see into every character's thoughts. So an omniscient narrator is one that will narrate what different characters are thinking, whereas a limited narrator only tells you what one character is thinking. Your next root is ortho, which means correct. And your first word is orthodox, which means conforming to the approved form of any set of beliefs conventional. This word is an antonym for heterodox. So someone who is heterodox has different beliefs from what's standard. Someone who is orthodox has what's considered the correct beliefs. So my example puts both of those words together. The Orthodox minister condemned anyone with heterodox beliefs. So the Orthodox minister has beliefs that are very standard. The helpful hint is good. An Orthodox church is a religion that strictly follows all of the religious laws. And the sample sentence is not related to religion. It says, Barry's golf swing was truly bizarre, while his wife's was far more orthodox and looks like it might have been modeled after the pros. So you can also talk about something like a golf swing or a style of dress as being orthodox, which is very kind of traditional and normal. Last word on this page is orthography, which is the art of spelling correctly. I'll give you a couple sentences here. The scholars studied the history of English orthography. So the history of how certain spellings came to be would be orthography. And second use, spelling bee champions are experts in orthography. So they are very good at spelling words correctly. So orthography can either refer to the study of how things are spelled, or it can just be knowing how to spell things correctly. And your sample sentence, the rising tide of spell check and autocorrect have caused orthography to become weaker over recent years. So the art of spelling correctly is more difficult for people as we can spell check and no longer memorize what the correct spelling of words is. So your first root on this page is pan, which means all or every. And your first word is pandemic. Pandemic means universal or widespread, especially pertaining to disease. It gives you this as an adjective, so you would generally use it as a pandemic disease. It actually also works as a noun, so you can say the pandemic spread all over the world. My example that I gave you was scientists worked to discover a cure for the disease before it became a pandemic. And the helpful hint is the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic disease is that an epidemic is a disease that is more widespread in a region than is normal. If an epidemic spreads quickly and far enough, it becomes a pandemic. So a pandemic is a disease that really spreads all over the world. And the sample sentence was, after the third terrorist attack in 2 weeks, the nation's fear became pandemic, and nearly everyone was afraid of what might happen next. So this one isn't referring to a disease, but is referring to something, in this case fear, which was really widespread. Your second word is pandemonium, which is a wild uproar or chaos. This is a pretty easy one to use. You often hear something like pandemonium erupted or pandemonium broke out in the same ways you would say chaos erupted or broke out. The example I gave you here, there was pandemonium in the cafeteria when a food fight broke out. So there was lots of chaos, everything was crazy. The helpful hint is helpful. You can see the word demon hidden in pandemonium, and that's no mistake. The noise made by all of the demons would definitely be pandemonium. And the sample sentence, when Claude finished his strange student council speech by firing bottle rockets toward the back of the auditorium, the audience erupted into pandemonium, with some students cheering like mad and others running for the doors. Yes. Your next root is retro, which means back, and I stuck the retroactive sentences up there, so don't worry about those yet. But your next word is retroactive. So this means, if you look at those two pieces, it's active going back. And the definition tells you, in effect with respect to occurrences of the past, inclusive of events or dates that have already passed. So that definition is definitely a little bit tricky. Let's give you the helpful hint first. You hear retroactive used with laws that get passed. If the president signed a retroactive law that cut student loans in half, it wouldn't just affect the upcoming graduating classes, it would affect people who graduated a long time ago who still had loans. So thinking about the two ways that a law that way could be passed, if student loans were all cut in half and it was not retroactive, if it was not retroactive, then anyone who already had student loans, you still have to pay those. But anyone who takes out new student loans, you'd only have to take out half, right? But if the law is retroactive, then it goes backwards. So if you have student loans that already exist, you now only have to pay half of those. All right, so these two examples up here. My pay raise from $8 to $9 an hour was retroactive, so I got an extra $1 an hour for each hour I'd worked last month. So pay raises are usually not retroactive, but if a pay raise is retroactive, that means that, your salary went up to $9 an hour at the beginning of last month, so now you get paid for extra for those hours that you already worked. Second one, the retroactive law legalized marijuana and released everyone in jail for possession of the drug. So if the law is retroactive, it says, well, this is no longer a crime, so if you committed a crime, you're now out of jail. In contrast, a law that was not retroactive, well, you'd say it was illegal when it happened, so you're going to have to stay in jail. All right, sample sentence. The president's tax cuts were not retroactive. People could not receive refunds on taxes that they had paid in the previous year. All right, so it did not go back. Last word, retrospect. Retrospect means looking backward at past situations. Let's see, the helpful hint tells you exactly what I was about to say. You commonly hear this word used in the phrase in retrospect, meaning looking back on it. Also, our senior retro is short for senior retrospective. It is a video that looks back on your 4 years at BHS. So we're going to use this pretty much always in the phrase in retrospect, so make sure you know that phrase. So the sample sentence I give you here, in retrospect, I should have studied harder for the test so I could have passed. So it really just is added on to that beginning of the sentence to indicate I'm looking back at something that I did before. So you'd say, in retrospect, I really should have studied so that I would have passed. You didn't realize it at the time, maybe you thought the test was going to be easy, but in retrospect, looking back, you now see you made a poor choice. The sample sentence says, as the sturdy treehouse came tumbling down, the kids realized in retrospect that pulling the nails out of it was not a good idea. Right, so I don't know why the kids were pulling nails out of their treehouse, but they thought it was a good idea at the time, and then it fell down, so in retrospect, they should not have pulled out the nails. All right, so that is the end of Unit 16.